Hello, Internet friends, and welcome to Todd Klint's SharePoint Podcast number 271, recorded live on Monday, November 30th, 2015. And that means 25 shopping days until Christmas. Holy cow. So if you don't know what to get me, I think I'll put up a wish list on Amazon so that you guys can. I know you guys are all worried about what you're going to buy me. What do you get the guy that has everything? I know I've heard it all before, but only 25 more days to figure it out, and you can hook me up. And who am I? I'm Todd Klint, of course, and I'm the host of Todd Klint's SharePoint Podcast, as I am most every week. We'll get to that in a minute. While you're here, the way that this all is made possible is by the folks at Rackspace. They are my sugar daddies. They provide all the stuff that we've got. They provide me with these fancy flags that I've got behind me. They provided me with the PowerPoint template that I use, and you guys will notice the eagle-eyed viewers among you. And for those of you that are listening on MP3, you're just gonna have to pretend like you can tell. But the eagle-eyed viewers among you will notice that there is a new PowerPoint template behind me. That's right, brand new. Only took me about 3 months to switch my template over. The other thing is this new template has a bunch of different layouts and a bunch of different color schemes. And when I first set this all up, I had the white color scheme on there so that the entire screen was just blaring and you couldn't read it. So thank goodness I tested that first and got the black one. But the folks at Rackspace gave me this brand new PowerPoint template for my slides at no extra charge. So thanks to them. And to pay them back, you can go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com and check out all of our SharePoint offerings. And while you're out there, go to www.rackspace.com/Microsoft and find out about the non-SharePoint, yet very important Microsoft offerings that Rackspace has. Also, go out there. And then also you can find me everywhere, all over the web, toddklint.com and at Todd Klint on Twitter. I'm Todd Klint on Instagram. I'm Todd Klint on LinkedIn. For goodness sakes, follow me and be my amigo and all that kind of stuff on all those social media things. I am out there, but follow me everywhere on those. All right, now for production notes. We actually have some production notes this week. Number one, apparently I need to increase the font on the production notes slide to make that more easily readable. Last week's podcast, number 270, was a good one. Lots of good content there, but it was a little late coming out. That, of course, is all Lori's fault because Lori took vacation last week, and that just throws everything off. So if you were jonesing for your podcast fix on Thursday and didn't get it, that's all Lori's fault. I don't know what else to say. But she's not taking vacation. I've not allowed her to take any more vacation for the rest of the year, so we're not going to have to worry about that. But next week I will be traveling. I'll be going down to San Antonio for some things down there, some Rackspacey things. Hopefully I'll be able to collect me another flag or two while I'm down there. And I'm going to be getting there Monday afternoon. I've got a bunch of things going on. And so Shane has agreed to fill in for me next week. Now I know what you're saying. Aren't there any, grunting monkeys or anything like that could have filled in? I asked them all and couldn't get anybody. Shane was the best that I could do, so I apologize for that. Who knows what that guy's going to talk about? Probably the Bengals or something like that. But Shane will be here next week, and since I'm on the road, the production might be a little slow also because I don't have my, I do all my podcasting on this machine. It's got all my tools, my PowerShell scripts and all that on it, and I may not get all that done. But we'll see. I will since the last 2 weeks have been slow, I will make a very strong attempt to get next week's out earlier rather than later. But I'm in meetings and stuff all day, and I don't know how that'll work. But Shane will be there next week. So be kind to Shane. He does the best with what he's got. Honestly does. He tries, folks. I know it doesn't seem like it, but he really does give it his all. His all's just not very much, unfortunately. But he will be in next week. Couple of things I want to talk about. Of course, we've got the world famous TK birthday charity drive that Lori runs, and she's already starting to get some solicitations for that. So if you want to be involved in that, you can go to pointgowan.com/TK charity. Of course, links in the show notes for all that. But this is something for those of you that haven't been a part of this yet before. This is something we do every year. My birthday's in January. And so a while back, I think the first year I did the podcast, a bunch of the viewers, Lori and Dan Usher, got together and said, what can we do for Todd for his birthday? And they decided, I talked a bunch that year. We were just kind of coming out of the recession in 2009. And I talked a bunch about giving to charities and things like that. So they decided to give to charities, and charities are their own choice. I don't even care if you give it to charities that I like. Give to whatever charities you want. And then for people that gave to charities because of this podcast or because I talked to them, Lori just takes up a tally. Now, in the early years, I was able to match those charitable donations with donations of my own. The last couple of years, the numbers have been up in the thousands, and so I have not matched. I might try to match again this year. My wife and I normally give a lot to charities, and for a couple of reasons, we haven't done as much this year as we had wanted to. So there might be some money left in the Clint family charity budget. So I haven't talked to her about that yet, and thank goodness she doesn't listen to this thing, so she has no idea. But think about that. Go to pointgowan.com/TK charity. And finally, for my last production note, last week, John Liu talked about moving the chat room to Slack. And that is something that I hadn't thought about before. I use Slack every day. I'm in Slack all the time. And so I looked into it. I have decided against Slack for a couple of reasons. Number one, because John Liu wants it, and I just want to punish John Liu and torture him. And that's reason enough, honestly. I could have stopped at one. But the second reason is to get into a Slack chat room, you have to sign up. And with IRC, you don't. You got to give them a name, but there's no usernames and passwords or anything like that. With Slack, you have to sign up, so you have another username and password to deal with. And on top of that, I have to invite you. And there's no out-of-the-box way to automate that. Now, there are some tools you can use, some like Google Forms and things like that, so that you can submit an email address and they will automatically be invited to the chat room in Slack. So I may look at some of those, but honestly, I don't want to make things too complicated because as far as I can tell, IRC is still working pretty well. Now, the one thing that might sway me is the web interface for IRC that I've got on my website at toddclint.com/netcast. Well, it's pretty sad and pathetic. It's a free IRC web part that I got from Mibit, and it's worth every penny that I paid for it. Now, those guys are nice, but it's a pretty bad experience for those folks using it. And there might be better web experiences for Slack users, for Slack channels. So I'm still looking into that, but for now, we're sticking with the IRC thing. And it was awesome. As I was bad-mouthing John Liu, he joined the chat room just at that time. So I don't know if he got to hear it all or not, but we'll see. If not, John, this is a good excuse for you to download the recordings. And it looks like you missed it. All right, on to topics. We have a bunch of topics tonight. And I'd said earlier that I was going to try to keep this thing down to a half an hour. And I will endeavor to do that, but I will be horribly over today. And one of the things, I don't have it in my notes, but I wanted to talk about it. Well, let's see. It's not in there right now, so I will come back. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is something that you guys should all sign up for this week. One of my coworkers, Ben Villanueva, is a coworker of mine and a friend of mine at Rackspace, and he is doing a free identity as a service webinar with windowsitpro.com. You can sign up for that. You can go to windowsitpro.com and maybe just /Rackspace. I don't know what the full URL is. But Ben is going to be doing that, and that is Thursday, December 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. God's time zone here in the Central time zone. And he's going to be talking all about why you should care about Azure AD, how you can get it set up, what pieces of it you want to use, what you want to manage it. This may sound like an identity or an Azure thing. If you're listening to this podcast, you're doing something with SharePoint, you're doing something with Office 365. This is the wave of the future. This is where your job as an IT pro, this is where it's going to go. The next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be up to your elbows in identity. And so a session like this is something that you definitely need. And the thing is, you know, a lot of us SharePoint folks, myself included, talk about identity and talk about Azure AD. But we do it from a very focused lens, and that's from the lens of what's good for SharePoint and what's good for Office 365. And that's good, that's helpful, but it's also really helpful to get information about these topics from somebody who doesn't know squat about SharePoint so that you get a bigger picture of the product itself. And Ben doesn't know squat about SharePoint, as far as I know, but he knows Active Directory. Ben is an Active Directory MCM, a Microsoft Certified Master in Active Directory. And when we go to meetings, and because I do a bunch of identity stuff with Ben and his team, he's a smart guy. Again, he's an MCM. He's very, very well educated, a good guy, laughs at my jokes, whether they're funny or not, and it's good stuff. And if you're busy Thursday afternoon at 2, you can sign up for it and watch it later. But again, as a SharePoint person, especially as an IT pro, you need to know this identity piece, and it definitely helps to get the identity story from somebody who's not just catering it to SharePoint. And so Ben's a great guy to get that with. I wanted to give Ben a little shout out, and there we have that. The next thing, the big announcement today, and there was all kinds of stuff about this, is Power Apps. Power Apps is a new Office application development platform, and it kind of rises from the ashes like a phoenix from the old Project Sienna stuff from a couple of years ago. And the idea behind this is they want an app development platform. And again, there's the crawl, walk, run of app development. This is the crawl thing. This is the kind of thing that I would use, and I did use. I used it for Project Sienna for a couple of things. Power Apps is going to be that. It's kind of the next generation of that. And it lets dummies like me or even smart people create these apps. And these apps will connect to all kinds of services. So obviously Office 365 and Azure and those kind of things, but also Salesforce, Dropbox, the much beloved OneDrive for pleasure, OneDrive Consumer. And it will also work on all kinds of platforms. So the idea behind this is that you will be able to write these apps easily, and they'll look great on your computer, and then they'll look great on your phone. Even if it's a Windows phone, they'll look great on your tablets. They'll automatically resize and do all these great things. And then on the back end, it's going to use all these great features that we, all the usual suspects that we connect to in the cloud: Azure AD, Azure Media Services for video. It uses Microsoft Graph to connect to Office 365. And it's going to be a great way to kind of build these simple little apps to expose things. Excuse me. And the idea behind Power Apps was they wanted to make creating and distributing an app that does work, that you use in your workflow. They wanted to make that as easy to create and share as a document. And they've done a pretty good job doing that. So right now, though, because this is just the way that they work, they're stinky little devils, you can't get in and use Power Apps right now. But if you go to powerapps.microsoft.com and read through all of the marketing blah and all the pictures and all that kind of stuff, at the bottom, there is a place where you can put in your email address and request access to the program. I did that today, and I got an email back that said, "Hey, we've added you to the list. We'll let you know when it's available." So even I don't get in anything fancy. But definitely do that. And when you look at it, they're going to have multiple SKUs of Power Apps. So there's going to have a free one that's going to do some stuff, and then there's going to be a standard one that will connect to a few more things and allow more people to use them. And then they'll have an enterprise one that'll do everything for everybody all the time. This was kind of the new news. And the great thing about that is for IT pros like us that can't really develop apps but need a little bit of functionality or need to make something simple, this is a good tool. So when Power Apps comes out and when it's widely available, I highly recommend you think about using it. But for now, go to powerapps.microsoft.com, scroll all the way to the bottom, and sign up for an invite. And hopefully you'll get in early. But this has all kinds of potential for just making these great little one-off apps that let you publish things easily and look good everywhere, and very agile and all that kind of stuff. One other thing that I'm going to be blogging about this week, but I just got so excited about it. I had to tell you guys about it. I've been, obviously since SharePoint 2010, I've been a huge fan of PowerShell, and we've all, told our PowerShell testimonies before, and I went in to PowerShell kicking and screaming and hated it and resisted it. And then without even noticing it, I fell in love with PowerShell. And with the SharePoint 2010 days, I started writing a bunch of PowerShell scripts to do a bunch of things. And then when SharePoint 2013 came out, I checked those PowerShell scripts to see how they worked with SharePoint 2013. For the most part, they worked pretty well. A few things were different. Search is a notable exception. It was a little different, but for the most part, scripts to create web apps and service apps and create farms and all that were the same in SharePoint 2013 as they were in 2010. So now I'm playing with the SharePoint 2016 preview. Beta 2 came out a couple of weeks ago, working through all that, and now I'm updating my scripts again. And the first one, obviously, that I need is my create farm script. And for the most part, it works, except for one line. One line in my script does not work, and that is the new SP configuration database commandlet. And why doesn't it work? Why, after all these years, does that one line not work? Well, one little word: MinRole. MinRoll is a new thing in SharePoint 2016. You've probably seen it all over. It's one of the things that Microsoft is the most excited about in SharePoint 2016. And it's the ability to give a server in the farm a specific role in that farm, be it a web server, an application server, a search server, distributed cache server, whatever, and tell that server, this is your job in life. You will be a search server, and that is what you will do. And then SharePoint, through the magic of timer jobs and rules and things like that, will make sure that that server is always running the things that it needs to do that job. And if something happens, if a service instance gets broken or something, SharePoint will try to fix them for you. And if it can't, it will alert you and tell you a server's not happy. That is the magic of MinRoll. But for that to work, you have to assign a server a MinRoll. And when you run new SP configuration database, automatically as part of that, the server you're running that on gets added to that farm that you just create. And I obviously wasn't defining any MinRolls with SharePoint 2010 or 2013 since they didn't exist then. So that one role failed, or that one line failed. So I'm going to be blogging about this probably tomorrow. And there's a few different aspects of this. One, I wanted to have one script that did everything. And so I wanted to modify my existing script so it would continue to do SharePoint 2010, it would continue to do SharePoint 2013, but it would also do SharePoint 2016. So one of the things that I show off in my script now is some PowerShell you can use to determine which major version of SharePoint you've got installed and before SharePoint's configured, because we've always been able to do get SP farm and find out which version we've got. But what do you do before the farm is installed? How do you find out? So this script has some logic for that. And then it includes some logic with a PowerShell command called switch that says, okay, based on this value, which commands do I want to run? And switches, think about, if you've got if statements, if you've got multiple conditions, you can nest your if statements, and that looks ugly and it's horrible. But I think switch is a much better way to do it. And so I implement switch in this script. And then I do a crazy thing, because inside of my switch statement, I have two values that should get the same statement for creating the farm, and a third value that should get a different one. But instead of duplicating it, I do this crazy OR thing. And that's another fun thing. And there we go, the white balance is the one that's off. And so the script will be all the things that you need to create farms for SharePoint 2010, 2013, or 2016, one script, and I will blog that and then talk a little bit about MinRoll. Now, the other thing about that is I'm setting this script up to basically do demo environments, right? Because we've only got beta for 2016 now. You can't really set up a production environment. But in theory, that will end up being the case. So then the problem becomes, what MinRoll do I assign this server? I don't want to have to ask people, though I could, because I ask some other things. But what I'm going to do, and what I did with the script, is I defined a role. I think I chose application, I forget. But the other thing that this blog post will have in it is how you can change a machine's MinRoll after it's been defined. Because Microsoft, the nice folks that they are, have allowed us a way to do that. And you can do it in two different ways. You can do it in Central Admin. So if you go under System Settings, there's a change this server's role, and you'll have a drop down there. You can pick it. It kicks off a timer job. It juggles all the other timer jobs, and poof, your application server is now a web server. But I'm just not a big fan of doing things in Central Admin if I can do them in PowerShell. And so this blog post that I'm writing for tomorrow will also show you how you can set this in PowerShell. And there's a couple of tools that you need to know. Get SP server, which is always the way we got all the servers associated with our farm, now has a new column with the default outputs, and that is server role. So it shows you which MinRoll your server has. And then you can use set SP server -role to change a server's role. So you can do it either way. So when my create farm script, or function as it will eventually be, creates your 2016 farm, it will assign your 2016 server a role. And then if you don't like it, you can just go in and change it. So that's what that blog post will all be about. It was a lot of fun work this weekend, kind of getting that all figured out. Now, I kind of alluded to it. I hope to make this a function at some point, because right now it's a standalone script, and that's pretty lame. I hope to make a function out of it soon. And I've kind of hinted about this. I don't know if I talked about it on the broadcast or if I did it outside, but I've signed up for GitHub, and I've got my PowerShell scripts out there. They're not ready for consumption yet, so I'm not sharing the URL. But once that's ready, then I'll have these scripts out there, and you can get them and fork them if that's legal in your state. And grab my ideas and make much better scripts out of them, I'm sure. But that will be a blog post for tomorrow, hopefully, if I get that all done. So that's been fun reading up on MinRoll and just learning all the PowerShell and stuff around that. All right. Oh, we got that over there. Okay. So the next topic that I wanted to talk about is everybody's friend Skype for Business, or Lync, as it's been called. It's one of those things that has many names. Now, this story here is about Skype for Business, not Skype for Pleasure. That's a completely different thing. But this is for the Skype for Business offering, specifically the Skype for Business offering in Office 365. And that is a product that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and they're improving it. It was one of the later additions to Office 365. SharePoint Exchange has been there for a while. Lync, or Skype for Business, is in there now. What they announced this week was that Skype for Business is going to be adding some new support. And the support will add for a couple of things. There's a bunch of them. I'm not going to cover them all here because they don't all excite me, honestly. But the big one is that if you have a Skype for Business meeting right now, and this is again Office 365, right now you have to log in with a Skype for Business client, and that doesn't always work for various reasons. So one of the things that they're adding to the Office 365 version of Skype for Business is being able to sign into Skype for Business meetings with a regular old phone to dial a number, the way we've been doing since about 1986. You'll be able to do that now with Skype for Business meetings. So that will be good. Another great thing that you'll be able to do is the Skype for Business client will be able to call PSTN phones. Now, PSTN is an industry acronym. Those of us in the know refer to the publicly switched telephone network, or what normal people call telephones. The PSTN network, you'll be able to dial out from a Skype for Business client in Office 365 to a regular phone number. And again, you can do this in Skype Consumer already. And I think you could do it with, you could do it with the on-premises product as well. But this will be added into the Skype for Business one. And but the important thing is, Skype for Business was kind of a late addition to Office 365, and it didn't have all the features that we wanted. So folks that had Skype for Business on-prem couldn't go to Office 365 because things were missing. Some of this PSTN support, PBX support, things like that. And seeing these added to the Office 365 product is kind of exciting. There's some cool opportunities in there. So, and part of this is going to be part of a new license that you're going to need. So it's not all going to be out, but you can go to, oh geez, I lost the URL here. Oh, I didn't put it in there, but they've got a blog post, and it'll be in the show notes, of course, as in all the links, but blogs.office.com from today, November 30th, has all the stuff in there. So if you're using Skype for Business, you're going to like that one. And if you're using Skype for Business, I don't have this in my notes, but there is a friend of mine, another one of my coworkers, Josh Blaylock. He is a Skype guy, and he does a Skype podcast. And so you should, and I don't have his links here. I will put them in the notes, but you can go to his blog, and he does nothing but Skype for Business things. So he would have, I'm sure he's got a bunch of great stuff on this. I should have talked to him about it. But for those of us in Office 365, trying to figure out what goes where, this is another great opportunity to consider Skype for Business. This next one I almost didn't add, but there's a story behind the story, so I'm going to add this. Was looking through the news and blogs and all that this last week, and I saw that Yammer now supports enforcing Office 365 identities. Now, there are so many funny things about that headline. I'm just not even sure where to start. Number one, I'm sure the 3 or 4 of you that use Yammer and like Yammer are very excited about this. So this isn't an announcement that Yammer supports Office 365 identities. That's already been around, though not implemented very well, but that's been around for a while now. But they have added the ability to force your Yammer whatever network to use Office 365 identities. So this is another slow step in the march toward having all of your identities in one place, and all of your identities in Office or in Azure Active Directory or Office 365. The move to Azure AD is inevitable. You're going to need it. Everything is starting to move towards it. Yammer is going to do it now. They don't add anything to Yammer. They added this. That's how important it is. So kind of the two reasons I wanted to talk about this were, number one, that Azure AD, again, is the wave of the future. Everything is moving that way. You just need to get into it. The other one is that it is such a big deal that Yammer is actually going to discontinue support for their existing single sign-on and directory sync situation that they had. So you'll have to use Azure AD. You'll have to use Azure AD Connect and sync your AD accounts up to Azure, and all you'll have to do all those things. That's all going to happen. Yammer is removing all their stuff, and support for that will end December 1st, 2016. So that is 366 days from now. All of you folks that are using Yammer and using SSO and desync, start your countdowns, because 366 days from now, it's not going to work anymore. So you're going to need to have, I guess 367, because next year's a leap year. So you're going to have that. But again, this is just another sign that everything is moving to Azure AD. So go to Ben's webinar Thursday, free webinar. Go to that to learn all about Azure AD, because everything is going there, even Yammer. And finally, this was an article from a couple of weeks ago, and I just kept not being able to get it in because there were so many other things to talk about. But this also combined a couple of other things that I love. One of the things is PowerShell, and one of those things is Azure. So a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was just 1 week ago, it was just the 22nd, Microsoft on their PFE blog, so blogs.technet.com /b/askpfeplat for platform PFEs, Premier Field Engineers. There is an article by Rick Sheik that talks about how to connect to Azure and do management things with PowerShell. And then the title of the article is An Alternative Way to Connect PowerShell to Azure using an Azure AD account. So this blog post, you can tell that Rick is a super technical guy, because there's just all kinds of great PowerShell and things like that in there. But a couple of takeaways that I liked in this article. Number one, that there's just more examples of how to manage Azure from PowerShell, which I think is good. Definitely something you need to be familiar with. You need to be familiar with PowerShell, obviously, if you're doing SharePoint. You need to start being familiar with Azure if you're going to do SharePoint, because all these hybrid things, and doing it with PowerShell is just the way to do it. So I like that aspect. It was just more examples, because he goes through a bunch of ways to use the PowerShell commandlets in here. But the other thing that he talks about is something that we all struggle with. All of us that have Office 365 accounts and Azure accounts, we've got demo tenants, test ones. For me, I get one through MSDN. I've got a couple through work. I've got a couple trial ones I use for blog posts, things like that. I've got a ton of these different Azure tenants, and handling them in the UI is a mess. Handling them in PowerShell is a mess. It's all very ugly. So one of the things that this blog post talked about that just really got me excited was the ability to add Azure subscriptions to PowerShell, and to have multiple Azure subscriptions that the commandlets that understand that they can switch between. So you can add all of your Azure subscriptions in PowerShell. The Get Azure subscription commandlet will list them all. You can set them all. You can set a default, and you're going to be able to easily switch back and forth between your Azure clients without having to open up multiple windows and typing stuff in all the time and forgetting which is which. It's all supported now by the PowerShell commandlets, and that is awesome. And it's another fun thing about it, and he pulls it up in his blog post, is that if you have a Azure client that requires multi-factor authentication, it actually pings you. So it actually, makes you do all that kind of stuff. So it handles all that. But I love this idea that now you'll be able to have multiple, subscriptions in Azure. Hopefully the Office 365 PowerShell will handle that at some point, but it'll be very easy to do all this kind of stuff. And I just really like this. It's the wave of the future. There's some great nerdy PowerShell in this blog post. So I highly recommend, hit it in the show notes and read that blog post, because there's some cool things going on in there. All right, so I got one more thing to talk about, and I was hoping that Adam would be in the chat room. So Adam Bertram, he was in the chat room earlier tonight. He is a PowerShell guy, and you can find him on Twitter at AD Bertram, Bertram. Adam Bertram is a PowerShell MVP, and Adam and I have been friends for a few months now. We chat a lot on Twitter and over Skype and all that, and just talk about the world and girls and things like that. But Adam and I have been kicking around the idea of doing a podcast together at some point. And at first we were going to do a PowerShell podcast, and I'm not sure if we're going to do that or not. He does some work with, I talked about him last week, does some work with the Twit folks. He's trying to get it in there if he can, maybe with their coding 101 or something. But he had the idea that we should do a tech podcast about people, not so much technology, and about like people in the trenches. So like when I've had guests on, and I'll have guests on again, but when I've had guests on, I've had mostly people that were big deals, right? I had Mark Manasseh, I had Jeff Hicks, I had Bill Baer, and some of the other people that I had lined up are well-known names, and they were exciting partially because they're smart and all that kind of stuff, but partially because they're well-known. They were, we know them, we feel familiar, we feel like we know them. So one of the things that Adam and I are kicking around is doing a tech nerd podcast, but just being all worker bees, people that aren't out in the community and aren't doing things and aren't, big deals or anything like that, and talking to them about their careers and about, what crazy tricks and stuff do they do that help them do their job, and what tools do they use, and just what's a day in the life of just an average IT pro look like. And that's kind of what we've been thinking about. So we've been kicking around questions, what kind of questions we're going to ask them, interview styles, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in something like that, shoot me an email. You can email me at todd.clint@rackspace.com. Since it's going to be just average Joes and Joannes, feel free to pitch in. And if your name comes up, we're probably going to try to get you on the show at some point. We don't know for sure when we're going to have it or anything like that. But we're kicking the idea around. It might happen. So if you're not already following Adam Bertram on Twitter, that's AD Bertram. And again, last week I had some links to some stuff he'd done in Coding 101 on Twit. But tell me what you think about this podcast idea about just interviewing average Joes and Joannes and finding out what they do. If it's something you're interested in, if it's something you want to be a part of, something you'd watch or listen to, give us a shout, and maybe we'll make this happen. All right, we're on now to the final part of our show, the final segment. We're almost home free now. We're almost done, so we can go watch Monday Night Football here in the U.S. at least. So then I want to bring this up. So I was thinking about this. Joanne Klein, who's often in the chat room, she's not tonight. I can't imagine she had anything better going on. But anyway, Joanne Klein is one of the many, many friends that I have in Canada, and there's a bunch in the chat room tonight. Nick was in here. Brian LaLancette is right now. I don't know. Yeah, that's all the Canadians. So I talk to these guys a lot, and just as a general deal, I try to be respectful of everybody everywhere. And I know in the U.S. it's fun to make fun of Canada, and I do it a little tongue in cheek. But I also, Joanne and I talk about Canadian rock bands a lot and all that kind of stuff. So I was going through some movies the other day, and there was a documentary by a sitcom writer called Being Canadian. And so I watched Being Canadian, and it was funny, and I learned a lot. But here, talking about American football, this is something that I didn't realize. Obviously, there's a Canadian Football League, the CFL. I knew about CFL, had never been exposed to it. But up until, like 20 years ago, the CFL had two teams that had the same name. There was two teams from different parts of Canada, obviously, that had the same name. And what makes it even funnier is there's only like 9 teams in the CFL. And there were so few names for those 9 teams that 2 teams had to use the same names. So it was like the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, and then somebody from out east. I forget what the other one was. And it was just funny because this documentary by all Canadians, filmed in Canada, interviews with Canadians, I was talking about, one of the things that they hit was how polite and apologetic Canadians always are. And Ottawa, well done, Brian LaLancette, the Ottawa Rough Riders. Yes. But talking about how, accommodating and polite and all the Canadians were. And of course, the way that happened was 2 different Canadian football leagues merged, and they each had their own Rough Riders. But that's when the Canadianism kicked in with like, no, you can keep your Rough Riders name too. That's fine. But we'll keep ours and you keep yours. No, I'm sorry. I have your name. No, don't apologize to me. It was a very funny bit about that. And so as if Canadian football, compared to the juggernaut that is the NFL here in the US, as if Canadian football wasn't funny enough. Now there's this idea that for the longest time there was two teams called the Rough Riders. Just kind of cracks me up. But speaking of Canada, on last Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, I had the honor and the pleasure of being interviewed by a Canadian, Rich Campbell. He is the guy behind Run As Radio, a very good IT Pro podcast. If you're not already listening to it, you should listen to it. It's at runasradio.com. He's been doing this forever, 440 some episodes now, 447 or 449, something like that. But Rich and I sat down and chatted for a little bit on Friday, and Rich is from Vancouver, and he's in Vancouver. And so I was able to put all my newfound Canadian knowledge to task when I was talking to Rich, put it to good use. But I was interviewed for Run As Radio. He's expecting my episode to show up as episode 451. He thinks that will be around December 16th. So check out Run As Radio, and I'll be talking about this for the next couple of weeks. But I had a great time talking to Rich about that. Rich is a great guy. And Rich is another one of those guys like Mark and Jeff that I run into. We all speak at the same conferences and hang out at the same events and things like that. So it was fun to talk to Rich, and just we chatted about all kinds of things, hybrid things in the future of everything, and it was a good time. So looking forward to that. And then, of course, SP TechCon, that is February 21st through the 24th, and that is in beautiful, sunny Austin, Texas, February 21st. I'll be doing 3 sessions. I think I'm doing a couple on Upgrade, maybe some on Azure. I forget exactly. But again, if you're at the show, for goodness sakes, come find me. Come introduce yourself. I don't know if Rackspace is going to have a booth there, but obviously I'll have sessions, so you'll know where I'll be for 3 hours during that time. But again, there's an event going on at Rackspace in San Antonio that same week, so I'm going to have to leave early, really early, like on the second day or something. So if you're going to be at SP TechCon, come find me early, and I would love to shake your hand and just chat about what you like. If you listen to the podcast, if you don't, what you like, what you don't like. And Lori is in the chat room, is offering, if you were intimidated to meet me or see me and I look like I'm busy and you're afraid to come interject, come find her and she will interrupt me on your behalf. Absolutely. Lori is, she's shorter than I am. She's got a prettier smile than I do. She's much more approachable. I'm pretty approachable, but she's also pretty approachable. So, but yeah, I'll be at SP TechCon. Come find me, please, and introduce yourself. So went over a little bit tonight. Looks like we're like 36 minutes, son of a gun. Again, trying to keep these closer to 30 if I can. But so thanks for sticking around for the end of this. Again, next week, you will have the guest host, Shane Young. Go easy on him. Again, he's doing the best with what he can. And I'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll talk about more stuff. So thanks, everybody, and have a good night.